All right, everybody, welcome to the Speedrunner podcast. Today, we are joined by the wonderful TwanM4n. How's it going, dude?
It's going all right. Having a good morning so far, at least over here morning.
Oh, nice. A cold morning, yeah?
Yes, definitely cold. For me.
All right, so let's jump straight into the action here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a scientist. I'm a geologist. I started speedrunning in 2014, I believe. I think I, in general, got interested in Twitch and then speedrunning when Twitch Plays Pokemon was a thing. I think that's when I really discovered Twitch, and then I kind of navigated away from that and found some speedruns, and I've kind of been messing around with speedrunning ever since, and that's pretty much the short part of me. I can go into much deeper detail, but I think that's the point of this podcast. So.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of touched on a little bit, but like, how did you get into speedrunning? You mentioned just watching Twitch Plays Pokemon, but how does that transfer into speedrunning?
Yeah, so let's see. I think I probably just kind of followed Twitch Plays Pokemon for like the first 2 days of what it was, like 2 weeks that was happening when they actually like finished the entire like run or whatever. But I was like, oh, this is a cool platform. Like, I knew that Justin TV existed at one point, but I just kind of forgot about it. And I looked around, like, I guess they were just called games and not categories back then. And I think the first run that I want to say it was Luigi's Mansion. And I was a big fan of Luigi's Mansion growing up. And I saw that, I believe it was Fire Dragon was doing, like, no out of bounds runs of Luigi's Mansion. I just kind of, like, watched for a while, and I was like, well, this is wild. Like, this is cool. Like, even though that didn't even have any like glitches, that's not like that really short any percent route or anything, but I just got super addicted to it, just watching speed runs of Luigi's Mansion. And then like later I think I found like I Ate Your Pie doing like all cards runs of Paper Mario, and that was when my brain really started to break, because I'm like, oh, this is wild. Like, all this just absolutely crazy stuff that's happening in this all cards run. And then it just kind of, that's when I fell off the cliff and was just like, okay, I now have to just like consume as many speedruns as possible. So then it went into like Final Fantasy VII. I love watching FF7 runs, like just Mega Man X and X2. And it just completely opened up. I could go way deep down a deep dive there. But then shortly after that, probably like 2015, I decided I wanted to try something. And one of my favorite games ever, Super Mario 3D World, the Wii U Mario game, and that was really the first game I seriously tried to run. And I think I have like a 204 like offline unrecorded PB, and I think it's 209 on speedrun.com. And that was the first one I really deeply got into, and I made some friends that way. And that's when it started to become like a very like social hobby, and made me feel like, wow, I'm contributing and I'm making friends. And ever since then, it's kind of been along that path where I'll learn a game, make some friends, learn another game, make some friends. I see it as kind of a social hobby more than like a personal challenge.
All right. Yeah. Nice introduction. And I think that's how a lot of people get into speedrunning. They see someone or they see an event of some sort, like in your case, Twitch Plays Pokemon. It's like, ooh, this is different. This isn't a casual playthrough. Or a speedrun, which is like, wait, what the hell? And that's what's fascinating to me, like in your mind blown, watching someone just break a game or just like do something incredibly fast. But before we move into the speedrun section there, your username, TwanM4n, how did you get your username? Everyone usually has some sort of story.
There is a story. And I always have to say, like, it doesn't mean man, it means something very, very different. So I am very good friends, and I was going to plug him anyway. I'm very good friends with a guy named Patrick Scarborough. He used to work for Riot Games, and now he's a streamer on Twitch. Does variety type casual plays and speedrunning as well. And he was a relatively big deal. Anyone that played League of Legends, like, and really knew a lot about League back in the day, probably knows who Riot Skarzard was, and now Skarzard plays. Before he worked there, we lived together at the University of Alabama, and by live together, I mean we both couch surfed in someone else's dorm, so we didn't even live there, but I'm doing air quotes, lived there. So he tasked me, or maybe I tasked myself, I can't remember, with waking him up before his classes, because he will admit that he was very bad about going to classes, and he did end up dropping out, but I think things worked out for him. He said, I have this Portuguese class. Can you text me when there's 20 minutes left before the class starts? So we have like, you know how it is with friends. You just kind of like make up a language sometimes when you're like texting one another. If you just get tired of saying, hey, it's 20 minutes until Portuguese, I would just like send him because all that mattered was the text message. It didn't matter what the content of the text was. If I'm texting him, he knows why I'm texting him. So I sent him a text message, and I don't know why it's weird how names work out this way, but I sent him a text message that said TwanM4n Portuguese. And that was initially my name on Twitch, was because I also made an account on Twitch, like as I was following Twitch Plays Pokemon. That's when I realized that that Patrick was also streaming sometimes under Riot Scars, or just playing League. So I was like, well, I don't know what name to make, so I'm just going to make it after this text message that I sent him. And then as soon as he sees the name in chat, he's going to immediately know who I am, because it's the most inside joke in the world. And then after time had passed, like when I started streaming under that name, people would ask me if I knew Portuguese, and I felt uncomfortable about that. I'm like, well, I feel bad because I keep having to answer this question and I'm disappointing people. So then when I had the option to change, I just shortened it to TwanM4n, and that's it. That's the story.
you didn't consider like Duolingo and learning some Portuguese just to satisfy your fans?
Yeah, I've tried to learn a number of different languages. I tried to take the path of like, oh, I want to learn Japanese so I can, be good at speedrunning, like, RPGs that seems like so many of them are like, Super Mario RPG, you need to like have some basic understanding, or at least know the position of things if you don't know Japanese. And so, I just kind of took that route of like, man, I would like to do that just so I can, open my options for speedrunning. But, it's hard to learn a language when you've like reached a certain age. I feel like, you're much better off trying to learn, as you're growing up, like a lot of folks do, but not me, unfortunately.
Yeah. The older you get, the harder it is to learn a new language.
That's the truth.
But steering back onto the path of speedrunning, you touched a little bit on it, but I'd like for you to deep down a little bit more. But what was the first like speedrun that you saw that really drew you in? Like, what game was it, and who was it that was running it, if you can remember?
So I had said, and I actually had a hard time thinking about it, because I suspect that would be the kind of question that was asked. I had said that it was 5 Fire Dragons. I guess he was Fire Dragon 764 back then, and he's shortened it since his Luigi's Mansion run. And this kind of goes into like what I like so much about different kinds of speedruns, is that like Luigi's Mansion, at least the No Out of Bounds run, is so like it's just execution for the most part. Maybe there's some RNG things I'm not thinking about off the top of my head. I did do a couple runs, but nothing super intense. But it's just kind of fascinating to see something done like without a lot of like glitches, and just done just as efficiently as possible. Not that that's not done in runs involving glitches, but it's so much more front and center when it's just the gameplay, quote unquote, as intended. And then, I moved over and saw, Eat Your Pie's All Cards run, and then there's just like a completely different fascinating thing about something that involves like these, loading zone storage and Black Toad skip and Blue House skip and just all this wild stuff. And then it just takes a completely different path of like, what is, like, how does someone even come up with this? And then, like I said, after that, I really got into watching Final Fantasy VII runs, and then, RPG speedruns are, as I'm sure you're aware, it's like a completely different beast of like just the routing aspect of it, and then like menuing, which you don't see at all in something like Luigi's Mansion. And there's just so many different things that I appreciate about speedrunning, and it's part of why I have a hard time running any single game, because I like experimenting with so many other different kinds of speedruns. And I don't even know if that necessarily answered your question, but in terms of like what really got me into speedrunning, like it's hard for me to attribute it only to like the first run that I saw, because like it was like the next run after that or next game after that got me a little bit deeper, and then the next one after that, and then I feel like once I watched RPG runs, I really went off the deep end, because that can certainly take up a lot of time watching someone run, FF7, no slots, the PlayStation version for sure.
Oh yeah, just learning the round and watching a playthrough of it is there's a lot of time that you have to put into the longer games, like the JRPG games in particular.
I've run a few, but not FF7 level.
not yet, maybe.
That's true.
But so you ran a bunch of different games. So some of those being Uncharted, race driving, Eternal Sonata, Stories: The Past of Destinies, and many more there. But when you got into speedrunning, there, what was your goal, or what is your goal to this day? Why do you speedrun?
It changes depending on the game. So, Super Mario 3D World was definitely, I don't know if it was the first game I ever had a timer up and did a speed run for, but it was the first one where I really got that, the bug of I've got to get that time down. I saw this part where I could improve, and I would look at a leaderboard and say I didn't necessarily think I'm going to get world record, because I certainly didn't come close to that, but I understood the reward of seeing a time and saying, I think I can do, the first run was maybe a 2:37, and I was I can do sub 2:30, and then after that it's oh wow, that didn't take that much effort to get to that point. I think I can do sub 2:15. I think I can, sub 2:10, and then at some point you get burned out. I think a lot of people do, and then it's really when I hit that plateau and I have to really put a lot of work into it that I begin to think about just trying something else out, if only just to kind of freshen things up. That and Uncharted, even though my time is maybe 13th on the leaderboard, I think I have a 45 now in Uncharted, any percent no airwalk. That was definitely one where it was also the challenge of okay, I got a 50, now 49, now 48, now 47. And when my friend Ascari got into SGDQ with the run, and I knew I was going, we were rooming together, that just motivated me even more. For most of my other games, I just find someone that I've made friends with, and they really love their game and love to talk about their game and talk about the tech and stuff, and I just want to try it, because that excitement's very addicting, and it just makes me want to try it out. I'm learning Grow Home right now, and it's just because someone ran it at the event we're going to talk about probably here in a few minutes. He ended up getting world record, even though he'd never speedrun before, and I'm well, that's cool. I'm glad you learned that just to submit to this event I started. So now I want to try to run it, and I did my first run of it last night, and I'm yep, I'm going to keep running this. This is fun. So, yeah, so it depends. Sometimes it's for a challenge. Sometimes it's just to kind of connect with friends. It's really depends on the game.
Yeah. So when it's for a challenge or more competitive that you want to improve your time, how much do you usually practice to get a better time?
I guess if it's for a challenge like 3D World and Uncharted, I do practice a decent amount. I would say I probably do for every hour of runs, I would probably do at least maybe an hour separate of practice. So I would say I would spread it about 50-50, at least on the front end, as I got a little bit better at the game. In Uncharted 1, it then becomes a lot less about practice, except for the example of a skip or two. I might just practice that, but then it just becomes just do runs. And I don't do a ton of longer games, so it's easier to just kind of do runs and maybe just no resets as quote unquote practice, so that you know that you remember what to do towards the end of a run. But at the beginning, it definitely takes a lot of practicing individual segments to be able to string together just a run without it completely falling apart.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just to get the gist of it and get
absolutely
the gist of the rundown. I know that was the same thing for me back when I started speedrunning, which was just Final Fantasy VII Midgar Escapes. It was just learning the menus. Yeah, it's the most favorite part. But the basics of it, just learning how to get out fast, how to do the things, and then eventually trying to get the step count down, which is essentially the really hard part, which I still to this day don't know, because there's so many new routes constantly coming out.
Yeah.
So
that's what
I still
scares
love
me.
it.
That's what scares me about Final Fantasy. A lot of the Final Fantasy runs is the step counter, and I guess there's probably some ATB stuff that makes my brain hurt a little bit. Like I'd be afraid that I'd just mess something up and it all fall apart. But I have a lot of respect for anyone that runs FF7 or anything like that. So
The ATB parts they're fairly like simple once you
Mhm.
understand how the game works. The step count theoretically is quite simple if you deep dive into why they do it, but
Yeah.
getting it down consistently and knowing exactly when you messed up, that's the
Mhm.
hard part. Like, oh, I got this encounter 3 frames before or after I was supposed to get it. Like those tiny details,
Yeah.
that's what can mess it up, and that's the hard part of it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of conversation about that. Like I got into FF7 from watching, I believe it was Carnage 64's runs of the any percent no slots, and I've heard all the, everything. Like I forgot to buy the batteries. This happened at Materia Keeper. Carry armor. That's the last thing I want to hear is carry armor because that hurts me because that's so close to the end. But
Yeah,
even though I've never run it, I'm like, oh, I feel like I've heard it all. Like I know every single thing that could end the run, even though there's probably another 100 things that haven't happened yet.
Oh yeah, probably. But speaking of difficult things in speedrunning, it's a nice little segue. When it comes to speedrunning, apart from like the game and tactics and glitches and those kind of things, I'm thinking more like outside the actual playing of the game. What's the most difficult thing for you or in general about speedrunning?
I think that plateau and I feel like there's like a number of different plateaus that you kind of hit, and I feel like that's kind of the case across a lot of different games and categories and whatnot, where like you may start running a game and then you just can't figure this one thing out, and even though you're going to enjoy this if you can figure out this one trick that, like, especially if it's something that's actually going to keep you from finishing the run, like certainly there are tricks that you can just not incorporate into a run and you kind of iterate as you go and incorporate more and more difficult tricks. But like there are things like when I learned Uncharted 1, there was a couple skips that at the beginning everyone else made seem easy, and then I would just struggle with it, and that things like that can definitely be demotivating and can kind of wear you down for a while, and in the end it can be the reason why you just choose not to move forward with the run, and that's I guess that's more of like an emotionally difficult thing to go into something and like really be excited about it, only to just kind of hit a wall and just get so frustrated that you give up. And that's definitely probably one of the more difficult things for me, and why I value like the social aspect of it is because it's the friends that I've made in the process that have helped me overcome things like that and allow me to actually get that reward of completing a run and feeling good. And but yeah, it's definitely like certain plateaus, like once you certainly the diminishing returns you get once you get closer and closer to like a world record time or a really good time. Like it's, you can reset 100 times before you get within a few seconds of a PB or something, and that can certainly grind you down. But I mean, it's part of the game. It's part of the whole process. So
Yeah, like we've talked previously on earlier episodes about the mental health regarding speedrunning and speedrunners, how much pressure they put on themselves, and sometimes even the viewers that put them on. Even though speedrunning community as a whole is generally very kind and welcoming and supportive, but how do you think the runners should handle mental health when they're trying to get that world record or that PB and they know they're hitting that wall? Because I feel it's an important topic that we need to talk more about in the community, because there's a lot of people, like you said as well, who get burned out or hit that wall and just can't keep going because they're exhausted.
That's absolutely a difficult question, and I would say that's really sort of like a mental health as a larger scale thing that needs to be addressed, where I personally think that that's something that stands out as a result of your overall general mental health, and I feel like that stood out a lot for me. Like I was diagnosed with depression like 8 years ago, and I'm in a much better position now than I used to be. But as I was going through that and actually having it addressed, when I would try to speedrun like 4 or 5 years ago, I could tell that was something that was, 100% leaking into what I was trying to do when I was trying to learn like Super Mario 3D World, for example. So, certainly making sure that just as a whole, like not within the context of speedrunning, but just overall that you're making efforts to better your mental health in whatever capacity that may be. That is super critical, because once I started implementing the practices that were suggested to me to better my mental health, I would see, the fruits of that investment, everywhere, whether it's, how I'm faring at work, how I'm faring with speedrunning, how I'm faring with, my various friendships, it doesn't matter. So I kind of see it as making sure that you're outside of speedrunning, taking care of your mental health, and definitely, if you feel like there's any sort of issue, or if you have, very close friends, which that was the case for me, reaching out to me and being like, this is something where you need to, look into like some, professional help, because as much as everyone wants to address it on their own, and it feels like a vulnerability and weakness, like that's part of the reason that friends exist. That's part of the reason professionals exist, is to make sure everyone's good to go and like taking care of themselves mentally, and it's super critical. But yeah, it's definitely I think of it more of like an overall overarching umbrella, whatever your terminology wants to be, type thing, and definitely taking it outside of the context of speedrunning, and then everything else more or less begins to fall into place as you take better care of yourself overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's applied to not only speedrunning, but life as a whole.
Absolutely.
To feel better as a human being and so on. But if we flip the coin a little bit there, what's the most like fun things about speedrunning? Both in-game and outside everything around it.
Sorry. I absolutely enjoy the community, for sure. That feels like answers sound like stereotypical or whatever, I guess, for a reason. That's, if everyone says, well, it's the community, it's the friends that you make, then, I guess that just makes it that much more genuine that everyone would say that answer, because I feel like that's the answer you always get. Because I've made so many like really awesome, cool friends, and more importantly, like from just anywhere and everywhere. So like the first friend I made, his name's MDMX Bad Bulls. I forever detest him for having such a hard name to say, a hard handle on Twitch to say, or Twitter or whatever. But he's a Scottish. He used to be he didn't used to be Scottish. He is Scottish. He used to be a Super Mario 3D World runner. Sorry.
One does not simply stop being Scottish.
I hope he listens to this, because he would very much have a laugh about that.
You can take the Scotsman out of Scotland, but you can't take the Scotland out of Scotsman.
I guess that was back when there was like a Skype group for Super Mario 3D World, which that blows my mind with the advent of Discord. But I made friends with him through Super Mario 3D World, and I was like, wow, you really can just make like friends that you talk to on basically a daily basis just through speedrunning this one video game. And that it was probably because of MDMX Bad Bulls that I continued to speedrun for, we're at 6 years now. And even though we don't really talk that much about speedrunning, and we probably talk maybe on a monthly basis instead of a daily basis now, like without him, I don't know where I would be right now. And then I've made friends since then, of course, and like at SGDQ, I did commentary for Oscari's Uncharted run, and I talk to Oscari on a daily basis now. And hanging out with him at SGDQ was amazing. Like, here's this guy from Iceland, and I was just like, there's no way I'm ever going to meet this guy from Iceland. And then I'm buying a ticket for him to go to a baseball game because he loves baseball so much. I'm like, if you let me sit on your couch for an SGDQ run, yeah, we're gonna go to a baseball game, and it's on me. And just like, that was such a great time. And I'm going to RPG Limit Break this year, and there's a lot of people that I know of that I haven't met, and I'm just looking forward to that. And just without a question, that's the outside of the actual game thing that I enjoy a lot. And since I spent so much time on that answer, I'll shorten the answer of in-game. It's getting the PB, like that the brain juice that you get whenever you hit the split and you see a time that's lower than the time you had before. Like I try not to take for granted a PB where it's like, oh, that was a bad PB. If I look at a time and it's lower than the time before, then I'm I'm just like, good, great, we did better. Maybe we can do better next time, or there's things to improve upon. And that's how even the world record run for just about everything works, is that there's something to improve. So I don't take a PB for granted. I see it and I'm just like, yep, that's the good feeling right there. And that's always excellent. It's just getting a PB. As silly of an answer as that is, it's just like, yep, that's it. Just there's the good numbers right there on the timer. Love
PB
it.
is a PB.
Yeah.
That's the advantages of doing shorter game runs compared to like the JRPG. I know I've mentioned this on a podcast before, but I'll never forget it because it still haunts me to this day. I did an FF9 run, and I spent was it 10 hours or more, and it was the worst run. Like everything horrible could happened, and then I PB'd by like 30 seconds. And I didn't even submit it because I was so ashamed of it. It was such a bad run. It was like, no, I spent 10 hours on this. I'm not submitting this because it's so bad.
I mean, I'm sure anyone that's done any degree of speedrunning, we've all had those feelings where I've had an Uncharted run and I missed this one easy wall clip like 5-6 times and I still PB'd by like 8 seconds. I don't want the mod to watch this video and see that. It's like, get out of here. You got a PB. Like, clearly it was better than the last one somehow because it's a better time. So just roll with it.
In hindsight, the greatest lesson there is to just think ahead and be like, well, this was a garbage run. However, my next run, I'll probably be able to save like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you got to see it from the positive as well. But you, as we mentioned already, you've speedrun a different bunch of games on various different platforms. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. Do you think there's any major differences between running on emulator or console, or maybe just the difference between running a game on PS3 or PS4? Like, are there advantages, disadvantages? Do you prefer one version to another?
I absolutely have preferences. I got to break this down a little bit. So emulator. So I run a game. I've done a few runs of a game called Kudelka, which is a JRPG. It's like the prequel to the Shadow Hearts games. And one thing that I've noticed is that I like to run games that are very bizarre, or maybe not bizarre is not the right word, but like. The Kudelka costs like $90 for me to get, so there's definitely a positive to running on emulator because FF7, it's still a little expensive to get like, the right disc for that. I guess that's probably like the green label version or whatever is like the fastest one, I think. But like running on emulator certainly helps there if you have a copy of the game, because I don't want to have my copy of Kudelka, mess up or whatever, because then that's a lot of money to replace that. And, changing discs using the emulator isn't that difficult. But at the same time, there's just something that feels good about running on console as well, just like running the game itself. And I kind of enjoy running on a console when I can, but there are certainly some instances where, like I said, with the emulator, that it's definitely a little bit easier. And the other thing would be is like how a game captures. So like I still have an Elgato. What is it? Elgato HD, like the one. It's the one that comes with like a delay, so like that's kind of a pain to kind of adjust to. I've gotten used to it because I've had it for like 6 years. But also like capturing PS3 can be a pain. Like in particular, I've always found it just an annoyance to run PS3 games because of I forget what it is, but the way you capture PS3 and you have to there's like a completely separate peripheral just for plugging in a PS3, and I have my preferences just for consoles that are easier to use. So like PS4 runs aren't that bad, Switch runs aren't that bad, 360 not that bad. Some of the older consoles, like I don't really run too many like SNES or PS2 games off of the console because it's just a little bit more of a headache to set up. Even though there's plenty of games I'd like to run on older consoles. So sadly it's all based on like if I'm not running on emulator, how easy it is to set up the capture, because I can be lazy and just like, I want to try to get that race driving all tracks one lap world record back, but I don't want to go through all the pain of getting this set up when I could just boot up my Switch and try to do Octopath Traveler again or something because it's already set up. I'm lazy, sadly. But
in comparison to the actual run, how how does it change if you're using a PS3 or a PS4 or an emulator or a console? Obviously, it's going to be different from game to game.
Oh, of course.
Are there any ones that stick out?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head other than bringing up Kudelka, because that's the one where I've like actually considered going back and forth between the two. I guess I like console just because there's not any... In general, I hate that I can't bring up too many like specific examples, but using like the PS4 controller to run a PS4 game versus using the PS4 controller to run like a PS1 game, or I like being able to use like the controller that's meant for the game, and I feel like that's maybe more of an issue with older console runs, because I can just the controller, like I can use a PS4 controller and I don't know what I was trying to say there. I guess controllers were so much more different than like using like a current controller to run an old game, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
that's the main issue with emulation. And I guess there's probably you can find an N64 type controller to plug in like a USB N64 controller, but those just don't feel the same as an N64 controller. So that's the big thing for me, is like it has to feel good in my hands when I'm doing a speedrunner. It's just not gonna work out. Like everything has to be like just right when you're doing a speedrun, because the smallest like little thing that feels off can mess with your head while you're trying to like perfect this trick or whatever.
Yeah. All right, so I want to change the topic a little bit here. You mentioned a little bit earlier about going to a baseball game and that kind of thing. Are you much into sports in general?
Growing up, I loved sports, and to a degree, I still consume sports. American football, I certainly have been a fan of American football for quite a long time, and I've actually gotten more into world football. I live in the Atlanta area, and they a couple of years ago added an MLS team, and I've enjoyed following them and watching them, and I would say that in basketball, I love watching basketball. I'll just shorten it. Yes, like sports.
Yes, yes. Sports good. Yes.
Yeah, sports good.
Sport good. No, but the reason I ask is because it's a reoccurring question that I feel is interesting to talk about, because everyone has their own take on it. But how do you think, or not how, but do you think that speedrunning could be considered a form of esport? And how do you think speedrunning compares to other sports and esports in general?
So I'm glad that I listened to your first few podcasts, because this was the question where I was like, if I get asked this question, I have to think a bit about this, because it's definitely can be a deep question. Yes, the short answer is yes. The long answer is that it kind of depends on how you frame it, because obviously speedrunning and Call of Duty, speedrunning and Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, speedrunning and League of Legends, they're all like those, kind of hard to compare to one another, but they're sports analogies that work in my head. And it's all about how you frame speedrunning that makes this something that can really sustain itself moving forward. And when I think of like a sports analogy to speedrunning, this is probably, and we can debate about what is a sport and not a sport, what's an esport, what's not an esport. The thing that I compare closest to speedrunning would be like professional fishing, if that makes sense. So
professional fishing, that's a very interesting comparison.
And the reason I say that is because you enter into tournaments and you compete against other people. You're not necessarily trying to get a world record. You're not trying to catch the largest smallmouth bass or whatever when you're in a fishing tournament. You're just trying to catch more, have a larger weight of fish total than everyone else you're competing against. Which, if you're doing a Link to the Past randomizer, it's not about having the best which randomizers may be an awful Celeste. Let me change it. Celeste randomizer is a little different. Celeste, you're just trying to get a better time right then and there than the person that you're competing against. If it's like a any percent race or whatever with someone, and then maybe you move on to the next round. Whereas like when you're on your own in fishing, you're certainly not trying to, like, you're not competing against anyone. You're kind of on your own and like perfecting your strategy and figuring out, oh, here's the best way. This is where I should go. This is the kind of bait I should use to catch this fish. And then that's kind of how I see labbing, when you're like practicing and kind of on your own, and that then you really are trying to absolutely catch the biggest and best, and like then you can show off your fish and be like, this is the biggest fish I've ever gotten. Is this, to me, is like TGH, like here's the Celeste any percent time that's, you know, world record now. So that's why I compare it to something like fishing, where it's like you can compete against other people, but in the end it's really a you activity, and you're just kind of on your own and doing it, and you're chatting with other people about the tech that you've used and how you go about accomplishing your task. And in the end, it's all about like, can events be framed with that in mind, and not thinking of it in the same way that you think about something like League of Legends or something like Super Smash Brothers or any Evo type thing. And I think that, you know, something like Break the Record that happened recently is a great step in that direction of opening up the possibilities of how you frame speedrunning as an esport. And I like to see when larger events and larger organizing bodies like come up with a new way to show off speedrunning, because I think it's going to take a little bit of creativity to make speedrunning grow as an esport, to be like to stand shoulder to shoulder with something on the level of like the Overwatch League. You just have to think about it a little differently, and that's how. Not that fishing's the biggest sport in the world, but I feel like that's the analogy to me. Is that
it's a very good comparison, and I wanna just play the devil's advocate for a bit there. But would it be fair to say that if you use that comparison, would it be fair to say that only very RNG heavy games could be considered a speedrun because of the how it's more about how you handle the situation rather than running a game that everyone does the exact same thing for?
If games where you did the exact same thing over and over like actually resulted in the same result over and over, then I guess I would tend to agree. But even with games that don't have a lot of RNG, there's so much of a human element to everything that just mistakes are going to be made, and there's also still wiggle room for like improved like tech. So I kind of see there being room for both of these things, and I certainly understand the like there's quote unquote RNG in basically every sport, where like if it's raining on a certain day, then one team, based on how they implement their offense or defense, they're more likely to be at an advantage. I get that. That's certainly tough. And I think that I'd have to think a little bit more about how that translates to like other esport events, because I don't really know too much about other esports. So that's also a shortcoming on my part, is not really understanding too much about actual competitive esports when I try to compare the two.
But it's not really, because it is a very, very difficult thing to compare two things that are so different yet still have similar elements to them. So there's no right or wrong answer, because as of this day, there's no real esport competitive scene for speedrunning that people think of. Like when people think of League or Dota, they're like, or Overwatch, it's like, oh, that's the big league. That's where you go.
Yeah.
But for speedrunning, there are a few tournaments and races and that kind of thing, but there's nothing that most people go, oh yeah, speedrunning, it's this one.
Yeah.
When it comes to tournament and competitiveness, there are events that focus on charity and such, but nothing that's focused on the competitiveness with a prize pool and that kind of thing.
And I'm glad you say that. I'll add this very quickly. It's almost like a double-edged sword, whatever the idiom is, with respect to something like the GDQs and ESAs, where speedrunning has been so closely married to charity that I think for some runners, maybe just people like me that are like super civic-minded and super idealistic or whatever, it almost, for me, if I were to get good, I would almost like start to feel bad about speedrunning to make money myself, when it seems like a part of the reason speedrunning has blown up is because of charity. So like there's a couple different ways to think about that, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Is that like speedrunning's blown up not to the degree that it has so far, not because of some competitive scene as much as it's just done so much good for other charitable organizations, and it almost feels dirty to like, well, now I want to make money for myself, that kind of thing. Even though that's not the right way to think about it, like you got to take care of yourself too, and if you're good enough to make money, then go for it. But I think that there's probably kind of a disconnect there that other, like Overwatch doesn't have to worry about that. Anyone that there's never been, like, to the best of my knowledge, like when I think of Overwatch, I think of the Overwatch League. I don't think of something that's done for a charitable organization, even though I'm sure it happens somewhere. But when I think of speedrunning, I think of charity. So I think there's maybe a little bit of an issue there that makes doing it as an actual esport kind of tough for some people.
Yeah, there's so many elements to it. One of them being what you said there, that it's very connected to charity. And then even if we go a step further, if we were to implement this being an actual thing that people want to take part in, how does that affect the mental health? Because that would make things worse for those who already struggle, because they want to be in there to get money potentially, and then if they keep hitting that wall when you just can't win, that might affect them, their mental health, in a negative way. But then again, if you look at, because obviously this can't be implemented at every game, like a proper tournament, but if you look at the bigger ones like the Super Mario 64, Super Mario Odyssey, for example, those are a great example, because I'm looking at the Super Mario Odyssey list on speedrun.com right now for any percent, and there are almost 2,000 people on that leaderboard.
I'm there somewhere.
Yeah, and yes, I saw you there as well. But that in itself indicates that this is a very, very popular game and a very, very popular category that could potentially start some sort of tournament, some sort of esport-like scene. But if you compare it to, let's take Final Fantasy VII for an example. There are a few hundred on it, but I don't know if it's enough to start a tournament or a scene for it. Like, there has to be that huge amount of people running it, like Super Mario series, which is an intensely popular game, not only to speedrun, but there are so many people watching people speedrunning it. So there's so many factors that you have to consider if this was ever to take a step into the esport-like world. Like, what are the advantages, the disadvantages? Could sponsors gain anything from this? And there's so many things.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you there. That's certainly a problem where, like, I'm not going to expect any sort of, like, competitive for money league for race driving all tracks one lap anytime soon. So, like, I run a lot of weird games. I'm not expecting to make any money anytime soon, even if I started to get world record in, like, the few games that I run. Like, Uncharted's the only one that even comes remotely close to that in terms of ones I've really run recently, to like a degree where that would even be anything close to an option. Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about the esports and races, and we slightly mentioned like events like SGDQ, for example, there. And I want to talk more about those events. Before we do that, I want you to tell me a bit more about your own event. You have an event called Remython, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And what inspired you to do this or come up with this idea?
So, when I stream, I've kind of gotten some following from the friend that my name came from, Skarzard Plays. I started streaming a lot more regularly when Skarzard left Riot and just started streaming on Twitch. And he was like, yeah, everyone go follow Jake. It's me, I'm Jake. And I'm used to being just called Jake now because he just kind of unmasked me. Now everyone calls me Jake. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I guess I'm not TwanM4n anymore. So a lot of the people that follow me, like I would say like 70 to 80% of the people that watch me regularly aren't speedrunners. So they would watch my runs and someone would be like, oh yeah, I'd really like to try to learn it. And I feel like I hear that a lot, especially around GDQ time. I'll scroll down Twitter and see someone, say something like, I'd like to learn, trying to think something off the top of my head, Batman Arkham City. I don't know, just something random. But I just don't know. It's like there's, to me, I hear people talk and it's like maybe there's a secret society to like get into speedrunning, it's like, no, you really just gotta do it. Like I like when I see things like, Golden's 12-hour challenge, or I think GDQ has like the first step, I think, with Hobbs and Keys. Like I like to see things like that to get people into speedrunning, and I heard it enough times from enough people in my own channel where I was like, all right, I'm just gonna hold a marathon, and if y'all actually want to do this, if you want to learn something, like get in contact with me. I'll help you find something, help you get resources if they exist, and I'm gonna have a marathon specifically for people that are either brand new to speedrunning or want to try, like maybe they only run this one game but they want to try something else, and if they want to show it off, then here's your opportunity for new runners and established runners that just want to try something new. So that was my twist on this. I named it Remython after my dog Remy, who fortunately has not barked yet, because he's over here somewhere. I'm just waiting for it. So I just made it sort of like a community thing, and I didn't want it to look even a little bit intimidating, so I run it completely by myself, and I certainly do not know how to run a marathon. So like, I'm not a graphic designer, but I made the graphics for it. It's on YouTube. You can look it up. There's just like a paw with Remy's name on it, and it's just like, you're new to this, I'm new to this in terms of what I'm trying to do here. Let's just have a good time. And the first event, which was back in September, was great. And anyone that submitted and anyone that watched, like if they were like in my Discord or whatever, I'm like, submit some photos of your pets. And during the little intermission in between runs, I'll just have like basically a slideshow of everyone's pets. And I just made it like a good fun time, and it worked out well. And I'm going to have another one named Zeathon after my best friend, his dog. He's going to help make stuff kind of themed after his dog. And we're just going to do it again. And it's so far in terms of submissions and stuff, the submission period ends in like the 29th, so yeah, 7 days from today. It's looking like it's going to be good, and I had 5 first-time runners out of I think I had 11 runners submit last time, and 5 of them were running for the very first time, and I think most of the other ones were running something they'd never really run before. And this year I'm adding 2 more to the current 11 that I have, and a lot of the other people were people that are learning a new game that were first-time runners last time, so I might open it up to be a little bit more open to a bunch of other people. Because really, if you don't follow me on Twitter, then you don't even know that it exists. But I wanted to get used to what I was doing before I made it maybe something a little bit more open to a bunch of other folks. But that was me, like after having taken part in a couple online marathons and SGDQ and whatnot, that I just wanted to try it out for myself. Just like these people want to try out speedrunning, I want to try out hosting a marathon. And first one was a huge success, and I loved it, so I wanted to try it again. So yeah, it's a 3-day long event. It was September 6th, 7th, and 8th that went really well, and we'll try it again here soon. And yeah, it's great. I love doing it.
All right, so you're gonna get some time at the end to plug all the things and where they can find you. I just want to clarify, we're currently recording this podcast on the 22nd, so this might not be released before the submission closes.
Oh, that's fine. It would actually give me a lot of anxiety if like the 28th you released it and then the next day I was like, oh no, we've gotten many more. So
yeah, it might be released next week. It could be the week after that. I haven't decided yet. Depends on the editing and all the things. But speaking of events and those kind of things, AGDQ or SGDQ, ESA, RPG Limit Break, there are plenty of charity events, and we've touched a little bit on this before, but what are your thoughts on those types of events?
Again, I focus so much more on the social aspect of speedrunning, and I went to AGDQ 18 with my friend Skarzard, and I went to SGDQ with Zia's dad, Ziathon, the guy I was just mentioning, and Oscari, and we also ran with Catalyst Z, who ran, I believe it was Dark Souls 1, I think that was maybe like the All Bosses or something, and like from a social aspect, other than the almost inevitably getting sick aspect of it, like I think that because that's definitely a serious thing. It's just such a fun, great time, and I can't speak on behalf of like ESA or even Limit Break at this point, but in terms of how they've organized it, especially considering how much they've blown up over the past few years, like I feel like they've handled it quite well in terms of giving people options to do outside of just taking part in the event. and the event itself, like the actual speed runs, I feel like are just organized so exceptionally well, especially considering how many runs they have to like, vet, and then, whether they accept or whatever, and then bring in volunteers. Like, as someone that's volunteered for other types of events, much smaller than any of these like speedrunning events, at least the big ones, the GDQs that I'm familiar with, like I'm blown away with how well it's done. And there's certainly criticisms. There's criticisms for just about any kind of event with so many moving parts. Like that I am very impressed with everything that they've been able to do. So yeah, I think they're great.
Yeah. and that's maybe part of the reason too that inspired you to start off Ramithon as well. There, yeah. So you've mentioned a little bit about the different games you run and why you run them and how you got into them and that kind of thing. But what makes the games that you speedrun so special to you and to your viewers and the reasons you're running them? Is there something extra? Like, is it nostalgia, or is it something about that game that makes you want to run it?
It depends. Some are nostalgia, like Eternal Sonata is one of my favorite games ever, and I learned that Oro runs Eternal Sonata, ran it at RPG Limit Break 16, I believe, had some notes for it, and so I've run games based on just how much I've liked them, like 3D World, certainly one of those, and Eternal Sonata, and I'm trying to think of some other ones that I've run recently that would be like that. A lot of them recently have been me playing them for the first time, and then just thinking at the end, like, maybe my brain's been like spoiled at this point, where like when I play through a lot of games casually, I'm just constantly thinking about like, what kind of speed run would this be? Let me just try to do it one time and see what happens. So like Kudelka was like that. I didn't know what Kudelka was this time last year, but now I've done like 3 or 4 runs of it. And Stories: The Path of Destinies, that's a very very random indie kind of obscure game. I'm running that at a marathon next week, actually. That certainly was just like me playing it and thinking like, oh, this might be a fun game to just kind of play fast. And Grow Home was another example of that. Some of it, I wouldn't say half, some of them are based on nostalgia, and that certainly helps, because you really do need to enjoy a game in order to if you're going to play it a lot, you better enjoy it. But then some of it's like, just I've found the right people to help me get through the game, and like the friendship that comes with it's also important. Like, if there's just someone I like that runs the game as well, then that makes the game a lot more enjoyable to run. And then the other thing is that it better have a good soundtrack, because you're going to hear it a lot. So any game with a good OST gets many bonus points, and Eternal Sonata absolutely has that. So that's one in particular. I'm like, that game has a lot of RPGs have good soundtracks, but I just don't have all the time in the world to run every RPG.
Yeah, that's the main difference about more modern games comparing to the older ones, because in the older games you didn't have voice acting and that kind of thing, so the whole setting the tone of a scene in a game was based solely around the music, which is why there's so many older games that have such amazing soundtracks.
Oh yeah, and a good battle theme in a JRPG, like, I'm a sucker. Like, the game can be could be awful in so many other ways, but like if the battle theme in particular is very good, then like I'm down to try the speed run of it, maybe just to see what it feels like, because you're gonna hear it a lot probably. And yeah, just the music is so important, because it's something that you're just gonna hear so much. So
yeah. So I wanna talk about categories a little bit, because there's a few games that you run. Or have done a run of, such as Super Mario, Luigi's Mansions are a great example of this. They have a bunch of different categories in them. And what separates the categories, and why do you think like a certain one is more competitive than another? It's a little bit touching on the subject, like which category is the true any percent of a game.
I guess generally speaking, I'm down to let like the community sort of have that shakeout, where like I'm sure at one point, I think Uncharted is a good example, but I won't go into too much detail on that, where any percent no airwalk's really the main category for that, even though there is an any percent category and there's a glitchless category. The any percent category is, I think most Uncharted runners would agree that it's pretty bad, because there's just like the airwalk that, there's a no airwalk, and then the any percent includes the airwalk, just kind of ruins the game. It all depends on like the the trick on like, because usually there's like the trick that separates any percent from like, any percent no major glitches, or any percent, like Link to the Past, for example. Like that's certainly one where like the any percent runs, like I don't feel like that's something that's really prioritized over like NMG, because at some point it gets just to where it's not as fun if you're just doing like this one thing where you kind of jump and then all of a sudden you're fighting Ganon. Like it's cool, but I think that the community, just as time passes, maybe for like a new game, it just kind of shakes out and like, oh, everyone wants to run any percent no airwalk, or like 70 stars, the thing that everyone enjoys, and maybe the case of like Super Mario 64 may be different, where like or other games in general might be different, where there's just like a flavor of the week type thing, where like it seems like everyone's running 70 star, and then all of a sudden everyone's running 120 star. Like I'm sure it depends on the community. So
yeah,
games are so different and categories are so different. Like even with race driving, we were just having fun with it. Like me and Oscari and a few others, we were just like, let's just come up with categories. It was hard to even come up with a single category for race driving, and then we were like, all right, let's do all tracks one lap, since technically it's not like Mario Kart where you end and you go to the next one. You can just keep going in circles, and that's the game. So we're like, we'll do one track for all of the laps. Now we'll call one Mario Kart, where we do 3 tracks, or three laps around each track, and then we'll do one called Pet the Cow with your car, where you're not running over the cow, you're just touching the cow, and when you hear the moo, you've touched the cow. Like that's like the meme category. The game's a meme in and of itself, but I think it's also fun, especially with like lesser known games, just kind of make up some categories just to have fun. Like in the end, it's all about, to me, what's the funnest thing to do, and that's the category I'm going to go with. And I assume that that's kind of what dictates what the true category is what most people are running, and usually most people are running it because it's the most enjoyable of the categories.
Yeah. So what do you think about like glitches and warps and that kind of thing? Because that's also a little bit of a hot potato. There are some people who consider using glitches as cheating, that you're supposed to, a true any percent is just playing through the game as fast as you can using the rule set that is the game. Whereas others think that no, if you find a glitch that allows you to do it quicker, then obviously that's the true any percent. What's your opinion on this?
This is a favorite topic of conversation for me. So in my channel, the friend of mine, the Zeathon father, he makes a million different commands in my channel. So like, even though there's probably an average of like 7 people in my channel at once, there's probably like 150 commands, because this guy just makes commands and I'm fine with it. Like it's kind of the Wild West in my channel. And a lot of them, like I think there's 13 commands in my channel where he has taken a comment, I think from the IGN, like whenever there'd be like a speed run of like some glitched speed run on IGN of like, Dark Souls or whatever, and he sees like just some probably serious comment, but a lot of speedrunners consider it to be kind of like a meme comment about like, cheats and walk through walls is a laugh. I will never give credit to this gaming type. Like, he'll just copy and paste that as a command, and it'll be like !cheat runner 1, cheat runner 2. So like anytime I'll do a trick, like in Uncharted or something, they'll do like cheat runner 2, and it's because there's a lot of wall clipping in Uncharted. It's like, cheats and walk through walls is a laugh. And so, so my opinion is that like there are glitches that are cool, that are cool to show off, like the wall clipping and puzzle skip and Uncharted, and a bunch of, a lot of stuff in Super Mario 64. There's some cool clips and stuff in there, and a bunch of other games. And then there's stuff that isn't necessarily as cool. Like I know that maybe there's like some of this like arbitrary code execution type stuff that like if you like to see the game, then you're not going to find that as interesting as maybe just like tech that makes your character move faster. Like in Super Mario 3D World, you can like have the cat suit and get super fast momentum no matter what character you have. Like that's cool because you're still kind of playing the game. But in the end, it's like any percent is, how it's defined, getting to usually, to the credits as quickly as possible, or whatever the defined ending is. And like, it is what it is. So like, if it takes, what are we now at? Like, we're under 10 minutes in Ocarina of Time. Like, I don't have any problem with that. It's fascinating for a completely different reason how people have found ways to get to the end of a game. Like, that's more of like maybe from like a coding or developer type standpoint. That's fascinating to someone like that, whereas like a no major glitches in Link to the Past or complete glitchless in Uncharted is interesting to a different type of person. And it's not cheating because there are defined rules. So if you're told you can and can't do this, like it's not cheating if you're following that rule set. So anyone that's running any percent, you kind of by definition can't cheat in any percent because you can literally do whatever you want. Cheating would be doing a glitchless run and doing a glitch. So it's like if you're still all on the same track. You're not going off course. You're still doing what everyone else is doing. So that's my opinion on it.
Cheating. The only term of cheating is if you break the speedrunning rules for that category. Then
there are certainly lots of arguments that take place over, how we define a category. How do we even define a glitch? There are some really bad, quote unquote, bad games when we talk about like awful block type stuff where like it's really hard to define what a glitch is because there are certain games that you can't even finish without, committing the crime of a glitch. So at that point, it's like, how do we even define glitchless, or how do we define what a glitch is? Like that's a completely different deep dive. Like how do you even define, especially when you get into like no major glitches, like what's a major glitch? And then I stay out of those arguments. Like I'll just follow the rules however you set them.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of theories about it, which is why I like to bring it up on the podcast because it's always interesting to see what everyone's take is about it. Mm-hmm. But speaking of like glitches and cool things and that kind of stuff in runs, what's the most impressive speedrun you've ever seen?
I feel like TwanM4n stole my answer when they said Palmer's blindfolded Parasite Eve run. I have a lot of respect for Palmer. Palmer either does like these amazing runs of good games or these amazing runs of bad games, and I have a different version of respect for each of those things. So I'll make that as an honorable mention. Uncharted 2, I tried it's all kind of based on what you try to do yourself, because like I can look at a game and it might look like it's like super amazing and impressive, and it is once you get to like a world record time. Like it doesn't matter what the game is, that's impressive. But maybe the tricks aren't as like, it's like the easy stuff can be super hard and the super hard stuff can be easy if just by watching it. So once you really start to try to play a game, that's when oh, this is impressive. And Uncharted 2 is so wildly different from Uncharted 1, and I just had to give up on it. And like Matt, who I believe is the current world record holder in Uncharted 2, any percent, like that game is just a murderer's row of tricks, and to me at least. And I have huge, amazing respect for anyone that runs Uncharted 2 at a high level, and then also like TMR's Battletoads blindfolded stuff's pretty cool too. So I like blindfolded stuff.
Yeah, that's always impressive to see someone do something in a speedrun setting while not being able to see it.
Also, to cater to you maybe a little bit, like I know that I only recently discovered, I think it's Mutsky that does the Final Fantasy IX dance pad stuff. Is that right? Is that a thing? Am I making that up? I feel like I saw...
It rings a bell. I think someone did it. I can't recall if it was Mutsky. It wouldn't surprise me because he's a bit of a crazy dude in an awesome way.
Yeah, that's wild.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was him.
Final Fantasy IX on a dance pad? Like, I've never played Final Fantasy IX, so y'all can, like, throw me out the window for that. Because I have it, I just haven't played it yet. But I know... I
highly advise you to play through it, and then give it a speedrunning go.
That is wild. So yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, but on that topic, diverging a little bit from speedrunning, there's another streamer called Rudism. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I'm sure I have at some point. There's so many names that roll around in my brain.
He's an Australian streamer, if I recall, who does these crazy things. Like one thing was he got level 1 to 90 in World of Warcraft using only a DDR pad, for example. And he played through Pepsi Man using Pepsi cans as controllers.
Okay, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and he makes like custom... Like, for Overwatch, if he plays Mercy, he actually makes a Mercy gun that he plays with. He does all these really cool things.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It's definitely worth checking out. He doesn't speedrun, but just it's really cool. It's mind-blowing in its own way.
I like to separate like actual challenge speed runs, like what I was saying with Palmer and TMR with like the bike thing and Battletoads. Like that's a different kind of impressive, and the dance pad stuff. And then I also want to make sure I'm separating like this is just the speed run itself, like Matt's Uncharted 2. Like that's just, you don't need a dance pad for that to be like just blowing my mind with how hard of a run that is. So
yeah. But it's like I think it was Luzbolheim who did there's a big menuing sequence in Final Fantasy 9, which is, it's generally hard to just get a good time because you have to unequip things, you have to buy things, you have to sell things, you have to re-equip things, and you have to equip skills. And usually if you get this under like 2 minutes, that's really impressive.
Yeah,
he did this I think it was an AGDQ event, I'm not sure, and he did this blindfolded, which just proves that the muscle memory that he has and how many times he's done that and practiced it. And that, for me, is one of the most impressive things I've seen in a speedrun. Just that entire menu completely blindfolded.
Menuing, while boring looking to a lot of people, is certainly critical in a lot of different kinds of runs, and in like a lot of Final Fantasy JRPG type games, menuing can be very impressive. I see it in Final Fantasy 7 in a couple spots where I'm like, that's cool that you just did that really quickly. And in Resident Evil games, there are certain Resident Evil games where like the menuing's just like, oh, that looked clean, that looked really good.
Yeah, there's some, and in some games, especially JRPGs, the menus are crucial at times as well.
Absolutely.
Especially,
you can mess up and that's the run.
Yeah, and especially like Final Fantasy 9 is a great example of this, because if you don't equip a certain item, that skill that you have to learn doesn't get the experience or the AP for it in a certain fight, and then you have to remember in the future of the run that you're missing out, and you have to re-equip it to relearn it. And if you don't learn it by the end of the game, that could potentially cost you the whole run.
Yeah.
So it's like menus like that can be very crucial in certain games.
Oh yeah, and like, I accidentally bought or sold this thing in FF7. Now I can't get into the golden saucer the second time. I guess we're done here.
Yeah, which is like just a small little mistake like that can cost you hours of work, basically. Yeah. But I wanna before we end or round things off here with the speedrun with the podcast, I want to go back to a little bit to Remython there. It was originally started there, designed for new speedrunners or people who want to get into new games and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Well, if you could give any piece of advice to anyone starting out or wanting to give speedrunning a try, what advice would you give them?
I think it's just important to just do it. Like, I think that ties back into the mental health aspect, where like there's for a lot of things that I do in my daily life, like I just have this block in my brain sometimes that just keeps me from doing certain things. It can be something as simple as just taking out the trash or washing dishes, or like mundane chores, or something I actually want to do, like learning how to run grow home. Like I wanted to learn to run grow home like a month ago, but just something in my brain was just keeping me from doing it. And making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that can be supportive. I think in general, again, this is more of an overarching thing and not just within speedrunning, but if you have a community of like speedrunning friends that encourage you, I think that makes it a little bit easier to just kind of get into it. And also making sure that folks are aware of the resources that are available to them, and that you don't necessarily have to jump in. There are certain games where there's not going to be a lot of resources, but it blew my mind that Oro had made a guide for Eternal Sonata, because I'm like, who speedruns Eternal Sonata, this weird Xbox 360, well, at least for the speedrun Xbox 360 RPG. Just do a little bit of research, reach out. There's a Discord channel for a lot of runs, there's notes for a lot of different things, and even if they're not posted in the Discord or on speedrun.com or whatever, like there's usually someone somewhere that's like, yeah, I drew a little picture of this that might help you, orient yourself in this game, or something like that. Like reaching out to people is important. And that's sort of the point of the marathons I've done, is to just get people motivated to like, just some sort of jumping off point to get you to start something. It's always the starting of things that's hard, and I think that having just any sort of motivation to start is critical.
Yeah, just do it, man.
Yeah,
don't expect to get world record, but just do it. Give it a try. See what happens. The worst thing that happens is that you have to reset, and then you get another go with more experience on your belt.
Yep.
Right, so we're going to start to round things off here, and as tradition states, we have a little quick fire round with 3 questions, and the rules here is that you're not allowed to think. You have a maximum of 5 seconds per question, so you just got to answer them on whatever on the top of your head. All right?
Gotcha.
So we're jumping straight into that right now. Quick fire round.
Round 1.
The first question, top 3 pizza toppings, go.
Pepperoni, mozzarella, not like shredded mozzarella, but like big discs of mozzarella, chunky mozzarella, and then there's these peppers called Calabrian peppers, or like spicy peppers. I don't like many other kinds of peppers, but Calabrian peppers are amazing on a pizza.
Oh, that sounds really good as well.
Round 2.
If you had to speedrun only one game for the rest of your life, which would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. Eternal Sonata. I love that game so much.
Alright. Nice,
Even though I haven't run it recently. I love the game.
Round 3.
If you were trapped on a desert island that had modern day housing with electricity, plumbing, a bed, a kitchen, a computer, what one item would you bring? And you're not allowed to say cell phone.
Is my dog an item?
Yes.
Then my dog, and then maybe Fire Emblem 3 Houses if I could somehow like have him eat it and then regurgitate it so that it counts as one item.
Yeah.
I've been playing that a lot recently and I love it. So if I could just spit it out. Okay, let's play it.
Yeah.
If I can smuggle 3 houses via my dog.
3 houses via your dog. That's gotta be a big dog though.
If we're talking actual houses, then no. My dog is not the size of an actual house. But
it's not Clifford the Big Red Dog though.
Now, he might not enjoy the taste of the cartridge if I tried to do that, from what I've heard. No, I'm not gonna lie, I've licked a Switch cartridge.
Yeah.
Anyone that's listening and knows me knows I've licked a Switch cartridge, just knowing my personality.
Yeah. All right, so that's essentially the end of the Speedrunner podcast here. The floor is yours. Say whatever you want, shout out anyone you want, and please share to where people can find you.
So I'm TwanM4n, TwanM4n. That's where you find me on Twitch, Twitter, and whatnot. Yeah, I have the event Zeathon, even if this comes out after the submission deadline. That's going to be March 27th, 28th, and 29th. I'll have a schedule up whenever all that's done. But shout-outs to Skarzard Plays. I've mentioned him a couple times. Amazing streamer. Absolutely watch him. Love the dude to death. I'm doing a run of stories, The Path of Destinies, on RPG Limit Breaks channel for Mini Boss. That's Professor Palmer's Bad and Obscure Speedrun Showcase. Someone that I haven't mentioned at all yet, the first organization that let me do a run for their event was actually at DreamHack Atlanta. I've done 2 runs at DreamHack Atlanta of Untitled Goose Game, and then 2 years ago of Uncharted. Like, the No Reset folks do a great job, and they deserve, as much attention in the world as they can get. So absolutely shout out to No Reset Speedruns. So I think it's just at No Reset Speedruns. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they do a fantastic job. But yeah, those are the big things. Watch Mini Boss. I always like to try and support like these smaller marathons, because now that I've done them myself, like I know the amount of work that goes into them. So No Reset, Palmer, and Mini Boss, those are, give them some love. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much. And of course, you can find the Speedrunner podcast on Twitter, which is at Speedrun Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify and Stitcher and many other places. My name is Sir Penguins, and I've been with you here once again, and I will leave you with this amazing outro catchphrase.